Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Management Muse. We are in beautiful Georgetown.
Yeah, we are. Texas, not DC.
Yeah, that's true. That's an important clarification.
Yeah.
This is a small little town becoming a big town.
Yep, it's in the middle.
Yeah, it's definitely growing very, very fast. And so that's where we're coming to you from. And today we're going to talk about the riddle of resting an organization when it exists in a turbulent, moving environment.
Yeah, good.
Start with kind of what the research says.
Yeah, tell them the goofy name that nobody will remember, but whenever we explain this, people get it intuitively.
Yeah, so it actually originally comes out of ecology, but it was a theory that was moved into the management literature, Baumgartner and Jones, and it's called the punctuated equilibrium theory.
Jargon alert.
Yeah.
Go to sleep, nerds.
No, nerds wake up.
Nerd wake up, nerds.
Wake up. The rest of you, you may want to pay
Rest
attention.
Everybody else is...
The rest of you may fall asleep,
That's
but
right.
you need to stay awake because this
Stay
is
awake.
actually...
Stay awake, non-nerds.
It's a good theory because it actually explains really what is going on in organizations.
Yeah.
So basically the main idea is that when an organization is born, it is the best fit it's ever going to be with the environment. And from that moment forward, it is a struggle for the organization to adapt to keep in alignment with the environment. And some organizations are in industries and environments that are moving faster than others. So, we're in a lot of healthcare, and that is an industry for quite a while now that has just been moving very quickly in terms of complexity and technological change and government regulations. There's just a lot going on. Yeah. And so that is an example of a very fast-moving environment where organizations are struggling, healthcare organizations are struggling to keep up. But this happens in other industries as well. Anything where the change is rapid. I mean, certainly
Entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, entertainment, retail. I mean, a lot of the
stuff that's actually kind of in threat right now. So I would say to some degree, even possibly some of the driving industries.
Yeah, could be.
I'm not saying that the self-driving is right around the corner, but we're starting to see some of that materialize.
Yeah, people taking more Ubers, kids waiting longer to get licenses, etc.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Kids are waiting an absurd amount of time to get driver's licenses. I couldn't wait to be free. So anyway, if the environment is changing really fast, that, the organization is basically getting more and more out of fit with the environment, which is bad. That, you can only get so far out from your environment before you basically die. And so it's a necessity to have an organization that changes, yet change is very hard on people. It requires a level of effort that isn't normal daily activity. With change, you can't get into sort of the routines and habits. You have to actually be in a new learning curve. And all of that expends a lot of effort and struggle for the people who are in the organizations. And because of that, you just simply can't have change all the time.
Right.
And so you're aiming with this theory, they're saying the best solution to this is to basically aim for, real drastic change that are sporadic so you have long periods of stability and basically trying to exploit kind of what you've built. And I don't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
But
harvest the gains.
Yeah. You're letting people rest and start to flow into a routine And you do that for long periods of time. And then you have these punctuations where like you puncture the norm. And for those, you got to get the most bang for your buck because you're basically disrupting huge sections of your organization, possibly the whole organization. And so make those big changes and go for it. And because you only have so much, you got to move that organization as much as possible to meet the environment today. And then you're going back into another long period of time of stability and solidifying.
Right. Yeah. So the challenge is, as we talk about this a lot with our clients, these long periods of stability in a lot of industries, they feel like they don't have them, that there's always a race for change, that we're always changing, constantly evolving. In fact, you hear that a lot in discussions about organizations these days, and probably for many decades. This idea of continuous evolution. And so this theory, to be clear, this theory is a little different. It's basically suggesting that organizations go through periods where they're surging and making great change. And then after that, as Cindi explained, you're harvesting your gains. You're giving your people in your organization a chance to, in a certain extent, rest, even as you're in a period of harvesting. And then you're preparing to do that again. Because in most cases, perhaps even in all cases, another period of change is coming.
Yeah, and we look at it because we have been in a lot of organizations in these types of industries, and you'll start to see just the overall exhaustion that people get. And certainly that contributes to burnout, but also you're just not getting your best when people hit exhaustion.
Yeah. You're not even getting your best when they're tired.
Right. And so you need them to be at a point where they're actually able to take the chaos that's happening again. And so we're going to give a few ideas on what that would look like. What are some ways to actually manage this dynamic?
Yeah. Most organizations can't just slow things down for a period of time and let people recover, although some can. Famously, many years ago, when I was in the Army, we would have kind of two periods of time on the calendar in a given year. One was a period called basically block leave, where this was the time you took your vacation. And it could occur at any time during the year. It was just our unit would be kind of coordinating that with all the other units so that there was always a unit nearby who was ready in case something happened. Mm-hmm. But, for this 21-day period, our unit would have block leave. And then the next 21 days, it would be another unit. And then the next 21, it's another, and so on and so forth. And so it's not out of the question that you could actually program in periods of time where parts of your organization are slowing down. And so mentioned we had two periods of time in the military where we slowed down. And one was this block leave period, which happened randomly throughout the year, usually once, I think, during the year. Depending on what was happening in the year, it would show up in different places. And then the other was roughly from December 15th to January 15th for about a month. Maybe that's a little bit longer. Maybe it's 3 weeks. But around the Christmas and New Year's period, we did what were called a half-day schedule, where no matter what, you could either be on vacation or you could be done at noon. And so those were periods where no matter what else was going on, you could count on being able to take vacation during the 3-week chunk known as block leave, or having a slower period of time during the holidays. And we work with, a lot of companies that are able to do something like this. I'm thinking of a company that's more philanthropic in nature, and they basically slow way down during the summer because they can. And it's not that big of an impact. And that's when most people take their vacation. And they push pretty hard to get to about May 20th or so. And then there's a fairly slow June, July, and August, not unlike a lot of schools. You could argue that a lot of schools are following a surge and pause, that they surge from Labor Day to Christmas, and then they pause from Christmas to past the New Year, and then they surge again until the end of May, and then they pause in June, July, and August. And so there's, I think, two gigantic points about this theory that we're talking about that's essential for people to try to wrap their head around. And while we're talking about it, in a management podcast. And the first is it presents a riddle of how do you actually pause in organizations where you can't take time off like that. And so a lot of healthcare, they can't just slow down for 3 weeks. People are sick all the time. A lot of fire departments we're in, they can't take block leave because they need to be running calls all the time. And some of the newer phase startups we're in, they don't feel like they can ever take any time off.
And I think there's also just I agree with that, but I think there's also the ongoing conflict that the schools have a huge impact on when people need and want vacation time, and not everybody can have the block.
Yeah.
Like in most organizations, even when they're not hospitals or fire departments, not everybody can have that block of time off.
Summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the schools are so significant in America. Their somewhat novel schedule of summer being off from the history of our schools becoming public when there was still a lot of farming done in this country. And so we actually kind of have those 3 weeks off. And that schedule has persisted even into the modern era where most of us aren't farming.
And as a result, like in the summer, in most of these organizations, like I don't know, I'm trying to think of any organization that we have, and it's across industries, where a day in July is just like a day in February. And they're open, but it's much slower in the summer.
Well, I mean, I would argue that in all of the first response we do, there's no difference. I mean, we work sometimes in first response around the holidays. But this is the point. This is one of those rare theories that nobody's ever heard of that actually makes you think seriously about your organization. Because as mentioned, it throws up this first point of how do you rest? I mean, look, it's not that complicated. The science on this is rapidly accumulating that people work best in period of surges, and then they need a break. I mean, I know this is controversial, but if you just spend 30 seconds punching it up into the Google, like how do human beings perform best? It's basically you got about, 2 bursts of 90 minutes in a day. The average human performs at their cognitive best for about 3 hours.
Right. And it comes early in the day. And
it tends to come early for 80% of the workforce that aren't night owls, the chronotype of basically being best during the day, which is almost everybody.
Yeah, and I think that the sleep has a big impact on that. So when you're freshest off of sleep, that's when you're more likely to get your 90.
Yeah, it's controversial because if you're a manager listening to this, that is what people can actually work at their best, about 3 hours. And so you think, I mean, I get it. We're paying for 8 hours a day. Again, this is just talking about in general, we pay for quote unquote 8 hours a day, but cognitively to get people at their sharpest, you get about 3 hours. And as you said, it comes early. And so we don't factor in the true human ebb and flow. And this theory does. This theory says again, there's 2 huge pieces. We're talking really about the first piece here, about this riddle it throws up of how do you give people rest.
And we're talking specifically about breaks.
Yeah.
There's other ways to give people rest.
Yes. Yeah. Like breaks, vacation.
Also just a time of stability where they're actually not in the middle of a learning curve.
You're not worried about a ton of stuff.
Well, they can get, their brain we can get a lot done on autopilot.
Yeah.
If the autopilot has become routine and not everything is about our brains being actively engaged. And that's sort of getting at what you're talking about with the 90 minutes. The 90 minutes should be or the 3 hours, I guess, your 2 periods of 90 minutes.
Yeah.
If we were ideally scheduling things in organizations then you, like the things that actually require your cognitive attention, the novel things, the challenging
the hard
things,
stuff.
the 2 90-minute periods is when we would put that to work. Because a lot of what we do at work is, I'm on spreadsheets all the time. And I'll have something going in the background to keep me company because, this isn't like I'm just cleaning stuff. I don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, you're doing your lower priority work.
Right.
Yeah. And this is important to think about. People are people, organizations are collections of people, and people need over multiple time scales. And so we're talking about the daily scale. Tend to be best in the morning if you've had a good night's sleep. You get 2 basically pushes to do your hardest work, 90 minutes each. That's if you can be uninterrupted and manage not to distract yourself. There's a lot of caveats there. We can have a whole podcast later about optimizing your daily schedules. But that's one level of
and
rhythm, but then there are other rhythms.
Well, and then the next level is just that, not the beauty of an organization is that not everybody in the organization has to be going through something at the same time.
Right.
And so you can have departments that are not in the middle of a learning curve and are just functioning like it's every other day, while other departments are in the middle of a transition.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I don't want to confuse it, but there's a lot of time scales going on with this theory. And so there's the daily rhythm, which we've just talked about, but then there's the weekly rhythm. And there's a reason why if you've ever been on the road on a Friday, there's not that many cars. People are tired by Friday. If they start their work on a Monday, they're tired by Friday. They're not working as much. A lot of people, look, we're in companies all the time. It's hard to get a serious thought after about 12:30 p.m. on a Friday.
And a lot of the time they want us there on Fridays because we're sort of a break.
Yeah. And so you have your daily rhythm we've talked about. You've got your weekly rhythm. And then you have your monthly rhythm where you kind of push to the end of the month. And then you've got your yearly rhythm, which again, as we've talked about in America, there's a heavy domination by the way the school calendar works that a lot of our years actually function off a school calendar. There's a fall, there's a spring, and there's a summer where we chill.
To the point where even 2 people who don't have kids,
yeah,
us, are still stuck going on vacations when everybody else goes on vacations because it even has an impact on us.
Yeah. We prefer to zig when people zag. And so it would be a lot better if we could take a vacation in the middle of October, but it's hard. Because everybody's at work.
Right. And and when we would be willing to work, most of the organizations we work with are like, we're on vacation because the kids are out. Yeah.
So we take our biggest chunk, the longest vacation during the summer because of the power of, and again, we're back to this idea of rhythms. And the challenge as a manager is you have things that are happening in your company where you need to push. But your people can only push for finite periods of time, and they need these periods of rest. Surge, we call it sometimes surge, pause. The challenge is that in a lot of companies, it's not that simple. Back to healthcare. People want to see a doctor basically, really people want to see a doctor all the time, whenever they don't feel well. But a lot of the seeing of doctors happens Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. And so the fact that it would be more convenient if you could idle a percentage of your hospitals or clinic, just like I talked about with the Army. Okay, this unit's going to rest and then this unit's going to rest. Well, you can't do that in healthcare because no matter where you are, your people, your customers, so to speak, want to be seen during a fairly conventional time. And so what we talk about a lot with our clients is, okay, then how do you rest the organization? And how do you give the organization a chance to catch its breath? And so recommendation 1, as you've already alluded to, is don't fight the larger calendar. And so look for the periods of time when you might be able to slow down. Again, people want to slow down when their kids are on spring break, when their kids are off for the holidays around the new year, and when the kids are off at the summer. And so you're probably going to grant a lot more vacation around those times.
Right. And if you can structure it where you can actually give big chunks or possibly the whole thing, like some businesses close. Like we just went through Thanksgiving, and so some places have had signs on their doors like, "Hey, we're not going to be open on whatever the date was for Thanksgiving," because like everybody wants to be able to be with their families. Hospitals have to do it a different way. Healthcare has to do it a different way. So what they'll do is, so a certain percentage will get it this year, and then and they'll swap holidays around.
Right. Yeah. So that the people without family or whatever volunteer for it.
And that's happening every year, and you have a process to deal with it. But then you also have to have these other breaks that happen that basically help people when the organization is doing rapid changing, because the ones that we anticipate happening every year oftentimes are not enough when there's big change afoot. Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
Good news. We're doing a lot of strategic planning work. Bad news is a lot of strategic plans are not strategic. They're just a list of to-dos or a list of ambitions, and they're not built around a unique insight or a unique strength that would be very hard for your competitors to copy, a point of advantage. And so we gather a small group of your leaders, usually around 8 to 10, and we walk through in a series of sessions, usually somewhere between 6 and 9, of half-day sessions, walk you through a strategic plan that's actually strategic. It allows you to figure out where do you want your company to go in the next 18 months or so. If we do these things, we'll be in a fundamentally different and better position. That is our strategic planning process. Is it fair to say that work has exploded in the last few years?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've all of a sudden done a ton of it. It resonates a lot with the clients. It's not your normal strategic planning process. We can produce a document. You may need a document at the end of this, but fundamentally, you'll walk out of there knowing this is the thing we need to do. This is what's going to make a difference to the company. And you will have done it. We help facilitate that. We have ideas. We've seen a lot of things, but that's going to come from your kind of core leadership team, and we'll help you get there. And we'll do it in a way that's serious without taking itself too seriously. OnDemandLeadership.com, OnDemandLeadership.com. Call us, reach out. We'll talk to you about strategic planning. From this idea that we're talking about called punctuated equilibrium, or how do you basically rest a moving organization? The first riddle is this one we've talked about figuring out the time and how do you give people the time and rest the organization, et cetera. The second riddle is that remember that this theory emerged out of the belief that the organization is, it's really interesting. I had forgotten that a part of the theory is that in the very beginning, the organization is at its kind of most optimal. And then every moment after that, it's racing to keep up with the changing circumstances, basically. Mm-hmm. And that it's doing it in lurches, not gradually, not I'm changing a little here, a little here. It's that I'm kind of holding what I got, trying to make that work, and then a big change. And then I do it again. And so I think about for the second part of the riddle of how do you make these lurching changes without being behind and doing it too late and without doing it too often, so that you're stressing unnecessarily the organization. I think about my Uncle Calvin, he's probably 80 something now.
Gotta be.
Yeah. His profession was printing press. And so when he first started, the printing press was the machine with the numbers in metal. You know what I mean? Like it was actually metal.
It's setting.
Yes. Type, I don't know if it's
typesetting, I think is wasn't it called that?
Maybe, but it was when he started.
Basically, it's like these little metal pieces that have to get into perfect alignment And yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like it was an art and a skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when he started, it was those metal pieces. And then it moved from those metal pieces, I think, to something called typesetting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge jolt. Like the metal went away and they went to something else, whatever, I don't forget the name of it. But that was the first big lurch. And so he basically trained, did an apprenticeship on all this metal stuff, and then was ready to begin. And it went from metal to non-metal. And so he had to go through a whole new training period. The company that he was working with had to go through a whole bunch of changes. And then just as they got that figured out, it went from non-metal to computers.
Yeah.
And so by this point, he kind of realized that enough this disruption, like he had a family, he had 3 boys, and he was trying to, like, I got to feed this family. I got to figure this out on my own. And so he went out on his own and bought a computer, a huge computer. And so like he's young, a new father trying to raise these boys. And he's already gone from metal to non-metal to computer. And then it went from huge computer to a few years later, smaller computers that then the customers could do it. And then he became a broker for printing. And these lurches were profoundly disruptive and stressful, not only to him, but to, with each lurch, a huge percentage of other companies doing these things didn't make the transition. And then new competitors came up, and then people who'd been doing one type didn't make the jump to the next type.
And some people jump in, like they never were in the old stuff, but now they're ahead because they're in the computer stuff. Right.
You had a bunch of people who were more hands-on in the days of the metal and the non-metal, non-computer, and then the computers come, and now all of a sudden you need nerds. Mm-hmm. And so now the nerds are in the business. And so the stress of these lurches or disruptions is why we need the periods of pausing and relative stability.
Yeah, the stress is not just that there's a big change in a learning curve. Because, I can think of some of the punctuations that my family has had. It's also that with many of these big punctuations, there are a number of people who are out there going, oh, well, your business isn't going to survive. And that isn't true. Like, your business can survive, but it has to adapt.
And so what's a big disruption or punctuated? We use the word punctuated because the theory is called punctuated equilibrium. What's a big change that your family went through?
Well, so we have movie theaters. And when videotapes came out.
Oh, VHS.
Yeah, VHS. The guy who owned the card shop across the street, he immediately jumped into it.
Like
Hallmark. Like Hallmark cards. He immediately jumped into it. He was ahead of us getting into it. And he was a bit of a jerk. And so anyway, he was blabbing all over town. I'm going to put them out with my VHS. They're not going to exist anymore. And so
movie theater.
Yep. So my dad said, oh, well, I got something for you. And he went and he opened up the video store in the lobby of the movie theater.
Selling videos in the movie theater.
Renting and selling.
Videos.
Yep.
In the
lobby of the movie theater. Yeah. And then it expanded into 2 other stores.
And so the first disruption was VHS from your movie theater, and you responded to that by putting rentable movies in your movie theater.
Which actually enhanced both businesses, because movie lovers go to video stores and movie theaters. And so the new movies would drive people into our video store, and then they'd be sitting there waiting. And so they'd be looking through the videotapes and like, I want to see that.
Pick that up.
Yeah.
What was the stress on your family during that time? And when were there periods of rest and stability during these lurches forward?
Yeah, so it's not the only time that obviously change has happened. And so to some degree, when you go through a few of these, like when everybody starts telling you that your business is going to dry out, there's a part of you that's like, okay, I mean, that's what they've been saying about think. Like, live performances should have gone out with movie theaters, and then movie theaters should have gone out with TVs. And you realize it's not as dire as what people are leading you to believe. That doesn't mean that you don't need to change, because if you don't change, eventually, you're the live performance and like in a town that
can't support it.
No. And they're going to movie theaters. And so at some level, you have to embrace it. But like initially when you hear that, you're like, oh crap, my livelihood might go away. But you just have to like make that decision to not hold on to the status quo. A lot of things in life, I think, are people holding on to the status quo, not ready to accept that change is upon them. And almost the fear freezes you in place. The fear that what you've got going now is going to be annihilated can freeze a person and almost make them hang to the status quo more than necessary. And if you can get rid of the fear and be like, okay, where's the opportunity?
Yeah.
Like, that's basically, now my dad, his response was one of, listen, you jerk, like, oh, you're going to put me out of business, are you?
Yeah, to the guy with the home.
Right. But if you're going to, if we're going out of business with VHSs, then we're going to be a VHS store.
Right.
And
sure.
And so his was like almost an anger reaction, but it's however you need it to actually be like, okay, this environment isn't staying the same. Like what I got going, it's probably going to survive for a little bit. I have a little bit of time to make a decision about adapting, but I must adapt.
Yeah. And I agree with that. That's a struggle, well documented in a variety of literatures about, endowment effect, status quo effect, whatever you want to call it, or tendency to think that what we have now is better than some unknown, uncertain thing we might step into. The opposite side of that, which is also concerning, is you can look on podcasts or look at books and they're telling you about needing to always change. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why we wanted to cover this topic is this idea of punctuated equilibrium is telling you do not always change. Or let me say it a different way. It's saying you can't always change.
Yeah, and that doesn't really happen. I mean, we've had CEOs who 1,000 ideas and every day is a new initiative and they get run out because they exhaust their people.
Yes. Right.
The change is too much. It's too constant. And you continue to do that to people. And then eventually enough people are like, oh, we're done.
Yeah. I mean, there's a Goldilocks element to what we're saying, which is you can't be the organization that's too slow to make a forceful move and to actually have a strategy that you're going to implement to put your company or your organization in a fundamentally different position. That probably you're going to have to do that every so many years, depending on your industry. And if you don't do that, you're going to get out of tolerance. Companies do need to make big changes. That makes sense. Most people get that. Lately, and I would say it's been in the last 10 years, we will occasionally hear advice for companies to always change. And in our experience of now we're in our 19th year of consulting, that doesn't work because your company is just a collection of people. And if you're saying, well, my industry is dynamic and this and that, then we're saying that's what this episode is for, is you got to do something really hard. If you're truly in an industry that's always changing, you've got to figure out the first riddle we talked about, which is how do you rest your company when it's in motion?
So your people are actually capable of making change.
Yeah. Part 1, don't fight the calendar. Stop opening on Thanksgiving. if you don't need to be. Let most of your employees take a summer vacation because people are mailing it in largely in June, July, and August anyway in this country. And, don't expect anything worthwhile to happen on a Friday afternoon either, because most of your people are very tired at that point as well. This really is an insidious belief that you can just keep going, micro change, constant change. We're constant change.
Well,
I mean, I hear that all the time. We're constantly changing. We're constant.
I blame it all on the Puritans. I do. Like this idea that hard work is virtuous. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's good. It's good. I think it's good for the brain. I think it's good for purpose. I think there's many things that are good about it.
Yeah.
But it's denying what humans need.
Yeah.
And so, work hard. Like, that's kind of like change hard.
Yeah.
But then you need rest.
Yeah.
Just like an organization needs stability.
Yeah. And if you don't do that, you will pay. You will pay with turnover and all of the ills that come with that.
Which is very expensive.
Costly, productivity drops, onboarding new people, not all the new people are going to fit, etc. And so here's my last example of soapbox, right? Like, so we went through COVID with a ton of healthcare organizations and they couldn't keep nurses because it was too much of a surge for too long. Like, basically, anytime you hear the word surge and there's not a pause coming after that, be very concerned because there's only so long people can do that. Many nurses surged for too long during COVID. As a result, a ton of them left the profession entirely, never to return. It's absolutely true. You're going to have to lurch from change to change. But those periods of lurches cause great disruption. And they're always going to have to be followed by a time of restoring somewhat stability and a period of rest and renewal for the people who went through that push so that they can be ready for the next thing. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to rest your company for years.
You don't even have to rest the whole company at once.
You don't even need to rest them all at once. Can you talk, before we kind of wrap everything up, can you talk a little bit about this? Remind me how that idea works about why is a company at its beginning the most aligned with its environment?
Because it's sort of like what we talked about with some people like jumping the chain, right? Like, I'm going to give you a different example. I was getting my MBA and we were in an IT class. In that class, I had like other students who were from like, say, Brazil. I think it was Brazil. And we were talking about like the different cell phones and the technology that goes into them. And one of them said, we basically lapped the US on cell phones in Brazil. So for a long period of time, the phone system in the US was, like the best.
Yeah.
Like we had the lines.
Yeah, landline.
We put in the infrastructure.
Right.
But that's all super, super costly. And so it was, other countries that didn't have the resources or the will didn't catch us on that.
Yeah.
So for that moment, we were top notch because that was the technology available. We put the money into the infrastructure. And because we had the money in that infrastructure, we were slower to respond to cell phones and putting in that infrastructure. But these countries that didn't have the landlines, they're like,
right.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And so they actually, for a while, completely lapped us in terms of the coverage in those countries because they just were like, screw it. I'm not paying for landlines. I'm just going to do these towers. And then boom, all of a sudden they had more convenient communication. I won't say better because the original cell phones were terrible, but they had more convenient phones than what we had because we were still relying on landlines for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so that's like an example. There's like an investment that happens. An organization forms. This is the technology that's available. This is the problem that we can solve with this technology. We put the money into resolving that. It may be beyond even just your particular company. It may be like, the United States, they gave out, I'm sure, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like somewhere back there, I know this, they must have given out money to help build like the infrastructure for the phone lines, just like they ultimately did with the railroads.
Sure.
And so you have these companies that are being built on it, but you also have like this uniting force of the country throwing resources at it. And so at that moment, your organization is the best at meeting that particular need. But then technology marches on and you're like, do I want to get into that when I have all this money over here? And probably I'm going to have to get into that eventually, but is it going to be that? Or is it going to be something that's like a couple generations back, like down the line?
Yeah.
And so you're teetering about like, am I still exploiting the technology that I have? Or am I ready to jump and put in this huge investment into the future? And is this a big enough investment for the future where I'll be able to exploit it? And again, I'm using the word exploit not as a negative. We'll be able to basically leverage it, I guess maybe a better word, leverage it for, another decade before I have to do something that is, again, super expensive to catch up with where the environment is today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while all that is happening, other companies are jumping the line.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I mean, that's why we want to talk about this. It's a theory you've never heard of, punctuated equilibrium. There's a lot of bad advice out there about how you should always be changing when actually people need a chance to recover from change. Companies are just collections of humans, and we sometimes forget that. We think companies are like, machines, but they're not. They're filled with humans. Surge, pause. There's a lot of rest that needs to be built into there. And the riddle to solve is, how do I rest a moving organization? Of which we've tried to give a bunch of examples here of ways to do that, which loosely categorized on, you don't have to rest all the organization at the same time, encourage people to take all their vacation, and make sure that you're looking for ways to provide a layer of stability after periods of upheaval.
Thank you for joining us today on the Management Muse. We appreciate all the things, the likes, the shares, the
downloads, comments.
Comments.
All of it.
All of it is very much appreciated, and we will see you next time.
Talk to you later.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.